give it up for Mike Massimino.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a seat.
Thanks for that nice introduction. And thank you for the warm welcome. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get the elephant out of the room. You are basically the person that got to live the dream of most of the people probably in this room, got to do something that almost none of us will ever get to do. So we really need to start with that. Tell me, what was it like on the Big Bang Theory?
Yeah, so there you go. Big Bang Theory is popular here, I would assume, as well. Okay, it's very popular in the United States, and I just got lucky, I guess. And so, sometimes you plan things out and they happen, and then sometimes opportunities just come, which I think is probably more the case. And I just got a call. This was a while ago. This was back in it was about 7 years ago. I got a call. It was over the summer. I got a call from NASA headquarters, and there's a guy there named Bert Ulrich, who's our public affairs guy who deals with movies and television. When someone wants to use NASA for a movie or television, they contact him. He works in Washington. So he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Mike, have you ever heard of the Big Bang Theory?" And I go, "Yeah, of course. We had this big explosion, and then things were, the universe was expanding." He goes, No, the TV show." And I go, "I think so. I think I heard of that." Yeah, so I did hear of the TV show. And he said they wanted to speak to an astronaut. They wanted to send one of their, and you have the picture here up there on the side there. Yeah, so the guy in the middle, Simon Helberg, the actor who plays Hot Wallowitz, thank you. They wanted to send him to space, and they wanted to speak to an astronaut about that, and more about the personal part of it, and family, and different funny things that might happen. And so I got a chance to meet them. I went out. It was out in California. Met with the writers and Chuck Lorre and the creator, and then who's the creator of the show. And then about 6 months later, they asked me to come in and do a cameo. So I said, sure. And so sometimes you just have to say yes to things when they approach them. But that's how that happened. And it's been a great relationship. Met a lot of great people and very much enjoyed it.
Okay, so let's go way, way, way back.
Okay.
From Big Bang Theory to the very beginning. So
yeah.
You are New York, born and bred.
Yep.
Did you really dream to be an astronaut as a young boy, as almost every
person?
I
did. I think I have a picture coming up here to prove it, but that's me as a little kid, dressed up as an astronaut. So I'm old enough to...
Was that in your hand?
Is that what?
In your hand.
Yeah, can anyone recognize who I'm holding right there? Snoopy. You have Snoopy in this part of the world? I would think you do, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah, Snoopy is in my hand, and that's that was my favorite toy back then. That's a Snoopy astronaut, right? Snoopy as an astronaut. And my brother, I have an older brother. He's 10 years older than I am, and he knew I was I was 6 years old when this picture was taken. And this was, I think this might have been the day after the moon landing. So I'm old enough to remember I was 6 years old when Neil Armstrong took those first steps on the moon. So I can remember that very clearly. I might be the only person in this room that can remember that. It's a very young crowd here. No, I think I probably am. But I remember that very clearly, and I wanted to dress up like my hero, Neil Armstrong. So my mother made this costume for me, and actually it's gray because I was an elephant in the first grade play. And my mother converted that costume to an astronaut costume, and I'm in the backyard. This is probably one day after the moon landing with my Snoopy, pretending to be Neil Armstrong. I guess Snoopy was Buzz Aldrin, and I was Neil Armstrong, and I'm pretending to be an astronaut in the backyard. But that's what I wanted to do at a very early age, yeah.
So you again finished high school in New York. Were you a geek, nerd in high school? Were you a jock?
I don't know. I think I was just kind of a happy kid. A little bit of everything. I played sports. I was in the band. I played the trumpet. I played basketball and other sports. I was in student government and lots of different activities. And I enjoyed math and science. I wasn't thinking about being an astronaut when I was pretty much by the time I was like 9 years old. I decided that was not something I could do. I just wasn't. I didn't see myself as a thrill-seeking type of person. I was afraid of heights. I still don't like heights, by the way. I do not. I'm afraid of heights still. And I couldn't see very well, and I had bad vision, and I thought this was not something I could ever do. So I didn't think much about the astronaut career dream when I was in elementary school and high school.
Then you went to Columbia.
I went to Columbia and studied engineering. I did like math and science, and so it made sense, I thought, to look into engineering, and I did, and I was lucky enough to get into Columbia's engineering school in New York and did that, and again, not thinking much about being an astronaut until my senior year, my last year of college. I went to see a movie called The Right Stuff, and it's based on the book by Tom Wolfe, and unfortunately we lost Tom Wolfe last week, the author, and I read the book as well, and it started to get my interest going again in the space program. So for me, that little boy dream that I had that you saw in that picture really never left me. I just thought it was impossible. It couldn't be accomplished. And when I got older, and after I graduated college, I was working for IBM, and I still thought that dream was impossible, but I came to the realization that, well, you might want to give it a try anyway and see what happens. And I thought if I couldn't become an astronaut, I always felt like the astronaut job was just could never happen. It just was too crazy.
Was this why you left IBM and went to MIT?
Yeah, I did, yeah. So I decided if I was going to pursue it, I wanted to at least give it a try. I couldn't control what would happen, but I could at least control whether or not I tried. And I figured if I couldn't be an astronaut, getting more education and getting involved with the space program, something I truly loved, then I could work or do something in the space program, contribute in some way. So I went to graduate school at MIT, left my job at IBM after working for 2 years, and that's when I decided to go on. That was my first really big step on the journey to try to become an astronaut. That was my first big step.
And like I said in the introduction, you decided to go to MIT, got 2 master's degrees, nerd alert, and got your first summer job at NASA. How did that happen?
Yeah, no, I was at MIT after my first year at MIT. This was back in the days where email was not yet that popular, and we used to have to write letters. And I wrote letters, at a typewriter, and I wrote letters to NASA headquarters, and just said I was interested in working for NASA. And I got a response from a very nice man who was very close to the top of the management chain there. He wrote back to me and said that I should give him a phone call, and we could discuss what I might be able to do. And so I got a summer job I applied for a summer job at NASA headquarters and did that in the summer. And so I did that my first summer. My next summers I worked. I did a few other interesting things. I worked when I was at MIT. I worked for the Marshall Space Flight Center for NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, for a couple of years. I worked in Germany for the DLR, German Aerospace Research Establishment. So those are some of the things I did during the summer. I did research related to NASA, and I started applying to be an astronaut when I was at MIT.
That was the first time you actually applied to become a candidate in the program. How old were you when then?
I was so my first application went in when I was 26 years old, and that was my very first application. I had gotten my master's degree. I was still at MIT, but I met the minimum qualifications, so I sent that application in, and that resulted in my first rejection letter from NASA a few months later.
And how did you take it?
I kind of knew that it was a long shot. I never kidded myself thinking that this was definitely going to happen. And I also knew that at that point that was pretty much on the young side of things, and that for them to pick a person in their 20s is very rare. We do it occasionally, but very rare someone that young even gets a real look. So I just figured, well, it's my first try. I got my name in there. They read my application, and it was time to just. That was the first one, and maybe the second one would work out. So I applied a second time a few years later.
And
I got rejected again. So so that was 0 for 2 with them.
So instead of going to NASA and becoming an astronaut, you actually became a professor for the first time.
I did actually. Yeah, when I got out so that second rejection happened right before I finished grad school at MIT, right before I got my PhD. So I got rejected that second time, and then I took a job. I think we got it back. Okay. I took a job at McDonnell Douglas, a big aerospace company in Houston, Texas, at the Johnson Space Center. So I worked there, was working there, and for a couple of years, and NASA announced they were looking for astronauts. So I sent in my third application at that point. My third try resulted in an interview. I got a phone call. They wanted me to come in for an interview. And the interview lasts a whole week, and it's mainly medical exams and an interview with the selection board. And then after going through that whole process, I got rejected my third time. So they rejected me on my third time there. Eventually, I got in.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Eventually, I got. You know, you see that picture. That you know at the end of how it ends, but it
We
was
have
a
a
lot of
better one.
rejection along the way.
We have a better picture.
Oh, go ahead. There you go. Okay. So on my fourth try, as you said, I did go and I became a professor at Georgia Tech. Applied a fourth time while I was doing that. So it was about a 10-year journey there by the time I entered grad school at MIT in 1986, and when I was picked in that's what I looked like back then. This is a long time ago. This is 1996, and I'm a brand new astronaut.
Class,
this
right?
is my astronaut class. Yep. So yeah, it's me. Where am I? I'm on the second row from the top on the left, third from the left. There I am there. That's what it was like back then, 22 years ago.
So basically, one of the keywords today was talking about perseverance and constantly working. So it took you 11 years of trying to get into NASA.
Yeah, that was it. 11 years, and that's somewhat typical. I started young. I was 33 years old when that happened. So when I got selected, when I showed up for work and was selected and showed up at NASA. And that was kind of on the young side. Out of this group of people, I'm one of the younger ones. I'm one of maybe the fifth youngest person in this group, and everyone else was a bit older. So in some ways, it took me 4 tries, but there were some who even tried longer than that. You know, some of my friends, we applied, were interviewed. One of the guys in there, Don Pettit, the guy in the upper corner on the right, he was in his 40s when he was selected, and he was interviewed 5 times. He was interviewed 5 times, and he started applying. He was 26, and he was as well like I did, and I think he got an interview right away. But it took all these. He had to keep trying. So that's I think the message there is that you can only control what your effort is, and you can't control the outcome of things. I mean, you hope you can try to make it a positive outcome, but it doesn't always work out that way. You can't always control that, but you certainly can control how hard you try. You can certainly control persistence in not giving up.
Okay, now this is probably the part that really interests a lot of people. So you got selected, you came to NASA. What happens then? How do you teach an astronaut?
Yeah, so you go through school again, but it's a different school than I ever went to. We right away, one of the first things we did is we had to learn to fly in a high performance airplane. We have the T-38 is our jet trainer, and in that class photo that you saw, there were a lot of military test pilots who knew how to fly, who flew professionally for the different branches of the military. We also had instructor pilots out at Ellington Field, NASA instructor pilots that would work with us. So our jobs, for those of us who are the scientists, engineers like me, our job was to learn to fly in the backseat as a co-pilot. So that was a lot of our first, but this is completely new. You know, here I was sitting at a desk a few months earlier at Georgia Tech or teaching in a classroom, and then I get thrown into this high-performance jet pilot training scenario where we had to go to survival schools, learn how to survive on land for a while. If you ejected out of the airplane and you landed in your parachute, and you had to survive, you had to keep yourself alive until they can come find you. So you learned how to survive on land and on water. We went through water survival training, and we learned how to eject out of the aircraft, parachute training, and then we got a chance to fly in the airplane and became proficient in that. And so it was this whole new world that opened up to me in aviation. And then the space flight part was learning about the space shuttle. We took classes and went to simulations on learning about the space shuttle. Also, the space station was just beginning then. You know, the first launch we had for an element of the space station was 1998. We were selected in 1996, and so we were selected to help build the space station, and that we not only got shuttle training, but we also got space station training. But it was extraordinary. I realized that in my first 2 weeks, I remember after my first 2 weeks of work at NASA as an astronaut, I realized that I had accumulated more memories than I had probably in my entire life up to that point. I mean, the extraordinary experiences that I had, the training we went through, the people I had met, even right away I knew I was in a completely different world.
It took 6 years since you started your astronaut training until your first mission.
Yeah.
So what did you do during that time?
Yeah, so most of your time, for an astronaut, most of you spend years as an astronaut, many years. I spent 18 years as an astronaut, and I had a total of about 26 days in space, right? So that's not
Which is
very
again
long.
more than most.
What's that?
More than most people.
More than
get.
most people. But I mean, on as far as days go, even my colleagues, Peggy Whitson, who's also in that picture, she had, my missions were to Hubble on the space shuttle, so relatively, you know, we're 2 weeks and 14, I'm sorry, yeah, 2 weeks each time, 12 days and 14 days. Peggy, she has 3 missions, and they were long missions, 6 month missions or longer on the space station. So she has more time in space than any American. But even so, with her being the record holder with over 600 days in space, you know, she's been an astronaut now for 22 years. So, you know, relatively speaking, you're only spending a small portion of your time in space. So most of your time is spent training for you to fly in space. Also, you're giving technical assignments, which are very interesting. I had worked in our computer branch, devising displays for astronauts to use on computers on the space shuttle and the space station. I worked in the EVA branch for a while, which was a spacewalking branch where we would look at spacesuits and EVA and spacewalking techniques and robotics. I worked there for a few years. I worked in the control center as a capsule communicator in the control center where I would speak to the astronauts in space. So you do these things to support, you do your training, and then you also do things, you know, little things here and there, like doing some outreach for the program, and you also support your friends that are flying in space. So whenever there's a mission up or a mission preparing, we would make sure that crew was taken care of, make sure their families were taken care of, make sure all the things they needed to get ready to fly were taken care of. So you trained, you helped your friends, and you also had your technical assignments.
So your first mission was servicing the Hubble telescope in
Yes.
2002.
Mhm.
It set an EVA record at the time, at least, for
We did.
36, yeah, at least that's what it says.
Yeah, and EVA is extravehicular activity, which
Actually,
is
spacewalking.
a fancy acronym for spacewalking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Basically
Yep.
that.
We did. Yeah.
So, and you were out for almost 15 hours, and that's in only 2 walks. So
Yeah.
take us through what you were actually doing, and also how do you work for 8 hours in space with no break?
Yeah, yeah. It's a long time. You plan a spacewalk to last for 6.5 hours. That's what the plan is, and that's a comfortable time. And in order to, you have to demonstrate that you can do that spacewalk. When we train underwater in a gigantic pool, largest pool in the world that we have down at the Johnson Space Center. And we train in that pool, and we have to demonstrate that you can do a spacewalk in about 5.5 hours in the pool. And then it'll add about a 20% factor, because going into space, you know, it's going to take a little longer maybe to do things. So that comes out to about a 6.5 hour spacewalk, and that's what we plan to do. But none of my spacewalks were 6.5 hours. They always ran longer. And as long as you have life support and everyone's feeling okay, you can stay out there if the flight director lets you do that. So that's all my spacewalks were. Yeah, I don't know what the longest one was over 8 hours, and I think the average is probably 7.5 hours or so. But that's during what we're looking at. That's me on the left, and my buddy Jim Newman on the right, and we are exchanging a reaction wheel which spins and points the telescope. That was one of the tests we had on my very first spacewalk.
Hubble was actually the first, I think still the only telescope that was built to be serviced actually.
Yeah,
in
the
space.
interesting about the Hubble is that when they designed, I mean, it's two things. Hubble has a few things going for it that I think makes it the greatest scientific instrument ever built. One is that it's a telescope that's in space, and the atmosphere that protects us and keeps us alive is actually pretty dense. And so when light, and it's thin, but it's dense, so when light comes in from the stars, even at night, on a clear night when we see stars, you know, they twinkle, right, when we look at them. And when you're in space and you're above the atmosphere, stars don't twinkle. They're absolute perfect points of light. And so Hubble has that advantage because it's above the atmosphere and can see perfectly into the heavens. And it can see directly into what it's looking at. It doesn't have the atmosphere in the way. The other thing it has going for it is that it can be controlled very, very precisely. It can, as if you're trying to shoot a laser about 400 kilometers away, you can hit a point, a point 400 kilometers away. That's how accurately it can steer itself, point itself. And it's because it has these gyroscopes which are very, very accurate. And then the third thing is that it was designed to be serviced by astronauts. So as parts wore out, as technology improved, you could then replace it with newer technology, replace things that wore out. So that was the advantage that Hubble had.
But you spent like we said, almost 15 hours on
Yeah.
EVAs, but you actually spent almost 2 weeks in space.
That's right. So yeah, so most of you're up there. You have to, you launch, you get things ready. You on the third day, you rendezvous with the telescope and grab it. Spacewalk for 5 days in a row with switching off the teams, and then after that you prepare to get rid of the telescope, and then you clean things up and come home, and that takes about 2 weeks. And you ask what it's like. How do you prepare for being that long in the suit? A couple things you can do is you want to be in physical shape, the best shape you can be, because you're moving the whole time, and your fitness level, you need your fitness level. I was in the best shape of my life both times when I went to fly in space, because I felt that I needed to be in the best physical shape I could be to last that long. The other thing is nutrition is very important. We don't have any food to eat when you're inside your spacesuit. They tried it, it made a big mess. It doesn't work. Having food on a stick didn't work in a spacesuit. You do have 32 ounces of water, so you have water you can drink. But so you want to get your rest, you want to have a good breakfast, and you want to make sure you keep yourself hydrated. And you practice a lot. We practiced over and over again in the years coming up to the flight. And it is an extraordinary experience. To get a chance to be outside the spaceship, I just found that to be extraordinary. Looking through the window of the spacecraft at the planet is wonderful, but getting outside is now you're not looking through the window. It's like being inside of a room, and you can look outside the window, and then you go to the backyard and the whole sky opens up. And where we were at Hubble, the space station is about 250 miles up, where Hubble's another 100 miles. So it's as high as the shuttle could fly, and you see the curvature of the planet there. You see it as a big ball in front of you.
Come on, look at the photo. It's flat.
Yeah, I know. We're going to talk about that. Now, a lot of people think the Earth is flat, but I think they should be thinking about something else to be worried about. No, it is round. It looks that's kind of flat there, doesn't it? Though.
Because it is.
We're about to make a turn, though. We're coming around the corner there. But it's just extraordinary. The brightness of the sun is the brightest, even brighter than that light that we have right there. And it's the brightest light I've ever experienced, like a pure white light. And the darkness, when you go over the part of the planet that is in the dark, it's the darkest dark I've ever experienced. And you go quite fast. 17,500 miles an hour is your orbital speed, so it takes an hour and a half to do one lap. In a 24-hour period, you get 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in that period. So
okay, now you're just making us jealous.
Yeah. So while you're working, you also have this desire to take a look and experience all that surrounds you.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question.
Go ahead.
When people work, at some point in time, it becomes just a job. I guess it can never be just a job up there.
No, it never did become just a job. It was always extraordinary. It was something that always required your full attention. Even flying in the airplane or whatever you were doing required you to think, and you had to stay on top of it. But it was very, very interesting, very, very interesting work. The complexity of it, I think it was more complexity than any one thing being difficult. It was just that there was a lot of things going on, and each one of those things required you to pay attention. So it never got old, and it was always a dream. I still can't. I did it for 18 years, and then looking back on it, I can't believe that it actually happened.
I have to ask one thing. Whenever any space agency, so NASA, is working on a mission, they always have multiple crews training for a mission.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a position that you were not the crew that was selected, and what's the feeling like?
Oh, no, well, they usually, the way we do it is you have, your crew is assigned to a mission. So multiple crews, but all for different missions, yeah? So, when you're not assigned to a mission, you're helping the others, you're still training, you're doing your job, and then once you get selected, then you get selected for that particular mission. So it's not like it's a competition who's going to go and do this. It's this crew has this mission, this crew's going to do this mission, this crew's going to, and you follow each other. Occasionally, sometimes for medical reasons, someone has to be replaced with someone else. So there are people backing up other people. That has happened just because things like that happen. But once you're assigned to a mission, what your hope is, you don't do anything really stupid, and you don't hurt yourself, and you stay healthy, so you can get a chance to go. And you don't really quite believe, I don't think, at least I didn't, that you're really going to go until the rocket lights and you start moving. They're like, okay, we're actually going this time, because you never know You know, you're always kind of skeptical, I guess, for some reason, like, oh, is this really going to happen?
So your second mission came 7 years later.
That's right, yeah.
And it was, let's say, a bit different because after the Columbia disaster, the second mission for the next mission for the Hubble servicing was being delayed for a while, and it was delayed for a long time. What was it like then?
Our Hubble mission, after we had the accident with Space Shuttle Columbia, I flew on Space Shuttle Columbia, my first mission, and then the mission following mine on Space Shuttle Columbia, we lost the Space Shuttle and the crew, and so we lost the Space Shuttle, we lost our friends, and we also sort of lost our program for a while. And there was one more mission planned to go to Hubble, and that mission was canceled because they were concerned about being able, you know, with what happened with Columbia, the accident, it took some damage the Space Shuttle did on its way up to orbit, and then because of the damage that it incurred, it wasn't able to return to Earth safely. A hole from debris, a hole was made in the wing of the Space Shuttle. And when you slow down, you know, you get really fast during launch, 17,500 miles an hour. And the way you slow down so you can land safely at about 300 miles an hour is through friction in the atmosphere. And that friction slows you down. And it also creates a lot of heat. And the heat, because they had a hole in the wing, entered the wing and took it off. That was the problem. So now we were able to, after the accident, inspect the shuttle and see if there was a problem with it. And if there was a problem, you would stay on the space station, because most of the missions were going to the space station. But there was one mission that was on the books that didn't go to the space station. That was the next Hubble mission. And so they thought that was a little bit too dangerous, because you go to Hubble, you don't have any place where you can live on Hubble. There's no life support there like there is on the space station. So they canceled the flight. And it took a few years for us to get that flight back on the manifest, back on the books. And that was we got a little more comfortable with the space shuttle flying again, and we devised the plan that there would be a rescue flight. So you would have you had two space shuttles on the launch pad ready to go. One would go to Hubble, and if there was damage on Hubble, it would be a rescue crew that would come and save us and get us home. So that's how we were able to fly the next mission. But it was in question it was actually canceled for a couple of years.
We have a very special photo from that one, and let's see if you recognize someone.
Yeah, that's me. Everyone see who's with me? So that's the same Snoopy I had as a kid. That's the same one. I hung on to him. I still have him.
So Snoopy also got to become an astronaut.
He did. Well, I figured, you know, what the heck? I had him with me in the backyard pretending. When I got a chance to go for real, I wanted to bring him as well. So yeah, that's my Snoopy. Same one I had as from a little kid. Came with me to space for real.
Now, I have to ask you one thing about the second mission. There's a video of you online breaking stuff off the Hubble.
Yeah.
So what was that about?
Well, that was on the second spacewalk of that mission, the fourth one of my astronaut career, and we were fixing an instrument inside of the telescope. And the way the telescope was designed is, as I said, you could remove parts and put new stuff in it, and it wasn't intended for you to take things apart inside. So there was bolts that would release the instrument. There were connectors for electrical power, data, cooling, and so on. You could release those things with your astronaut glove and tools, and that's the way we did. Take a big thing out, like we're doing in that image that's shown on the side there. You know, we removed that. There was something wrong with that reaction wheel. We didn't try to fix the reaction. We take it out, put a new one in, bring the old one home, and then fix it on the ground. But we couldn't do that with the big instruments. The big instruments, there was this one in particular called the Space Telescope Imaging Spectrograph. We didn't have a replacement for, and it had a power supply problem, so it wasn't working any longer. And its purpose, amongst other things, is it could analyze the atmospheres of planets and other solar systems. So this was a very useful instrument being used today now, because we were able to successfully fix it. But during that spacewalk, what I did is I was trying to remove a handrail which was in the way. It was used to install the instrument years earlier and didn't have any use any longer. So we needed to get that handrail out of the way and then remove a plate with 111 very small screws, and it was something never intended to be done in space, but we devised special tools to do that, to remove this power supply. But the easiest thing, and put a new power supply in, that was going to be hard, but the easiest thing was removing this handrail. So of course I strip a screw on the handrail and it's not coming off, and after troubleshooting for about an hour and a half, the solution was just to try to rip it off. because 3 of the screws came out. It was just being held on by 1 screw at the bottom. And so that's what I was able to do, is just tear it off.
Explain, please, why that is so dangerous.
Well, it seems like a very simple solution. I talk about this to my students. I'm a professor at Columbia now, and I talk to my engineering students that sometimes you think things are just an easy solution, but you have to think of it first. And I didn't think of it, and neither did my crewmates, and none of the people in the front room of our control center thought that as a solution as well, because when you tear a piece of metal, bust a piece of metal like that, you're going to create debris. And that debris can get thrown up into the telescope, which is not allowed. You can't have any debris in the telescope at all, not even a flake or a speck of anything. So that would have been a problem. And worse could have been if it would have, I was going to be right there busting this thing, breaking it off, if a piece of metal flew off of there and hit my suit. They were very concerned about that as well. So wouldn't even think that that was a possibility, but some engineer luckily got that idea, sent it up to one of our space flight centers in Maryland, where there was a replica of the instrument in a clean room. They had to get it out of a clean room, which is a positive airflow room. It's not an easy thing to remove things, but they got this instrument out of there and they pulled on that handrail. And their suggestion was for me to tape the bottom of the handrail. We did have tape, very special tape that we have outside in our toolbox, and I was able to tape the bottom of it to contain that debris, and it worked just fine.
So the moral of the story is always have duct tape, because it solves everything.
Oh, it wasn't duct tape. This is Kapton tape. Yes, but tape is very useful. You never know when you're going to need it. So.
One thing or more we need to, of course, mention about this second mission, since this is a digital conference most of all. You were the first person to tweet from space on that mission.
Yeah.
So how did that come to pass?
I had heard, this is another one of these things where they ask you and it's a good idea to say yes. And it wasn't my idea. I had heard about Twitter. We were training for the flight. We got assigned in 06. And we were training. I think Twitter started becoming more popular like in 2008. I remember our president, Barack Obama, was elected. He tweeted from the inauguration in 2009. And I started hearing more and more about social media and Twitter. And so someone at NASA thought it would be a good idea to have an astronaut start the tweet and to send the first tweet from space. And so they asked me, it just was a timing thing, because we flew in May of 09. And so NASA approached me and said, would you like to do this? And my commander was okay with it, and I said, yeah, sure. That was another one of those things where I really didn't know too much about what about it at the time, but I really liked it. What I liked about it was that it was only 140 characters. So at the time, I guess now it's more, right? But at that time you could just have these little messages, and I could share those experiences, and I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I felt so lucky to do it, and was excited about it, and people seemed to be interested in hearing about it, but we didn't have as many avenues as we would have liked. At least I didn't feel that way, to share that experience. So social media is a great way to do that. It's quick. You get the message out, and a lot of people can see it all at once. And so that's how it all came about. And I was able to send that first tweet the very first day of my second mission.
So then you came back, and then came the Hollywood life.
Yeah, then came
TV
the
shows,
I guess,
podcasts, guest signings, appearances, Big Bang Theory, as we said. What was that like?
Well, yeah, it's interesting how all that came about for me. I always enjoyed telling that story of what we were doing, and I thought it was important, and people seemed to connect with it. I think more than my other colleagues. And the astronaut office, I think I enjoyed doing that more than the average astronaut did. And so when opportunities came up, whatever it might have been, to go on the news or to do an interview, or when they asked me, I did it. And they did a movie on our flight as well. It was an IMAX movie called Hubble 3D. I got a chance to go on some of the late night shows, the Late Show with David Letterman, which is very popular in the United States. I got to go on that with him. I got to meet him. And some of the other late night shows and morning shows, and I just enjoyed doing it, and led to more and more. And after I left NASA, I wrote a book, and now I'm hosting a couple shows.
Yeah, we'll get both to the book.
So I just enjoy doing it, and I think that's a Big Bang Theory there. But I think it's a great way to. Excuse me a second, I'm losing my mic here. I think that the use of whether it's social media or television or writing a book or a blog or whatever you might do, we have these these resources available to us to educate and tell these stories to people. And I always felt that as an astronaut, we were so lucky to get the opportunity to do that. So many people want to go to space. So many people who were very well qualified, as much as we were, if not more so, to do that job, were not able to because they just were not fortunate enough to be selected, and we were. That I felt like it was something that we should do, is share that story in any way we could. And whether it's in social media or television or writing or teaching, I teach in the classroom, I work at the Intrepid Museum, or even coming here to this conference, I think it's an important thing to share that story, to inspire people like we were inspired in the view of the planet that we had, the experience that we've had, to see how fragile and beautiful our planet is. To be able to turn your head and look into that vastness of space, and then look back at our atmosphere, how thin it is, how fragile it is, and realize just a few hundred miles above it, we cannot exist without a spacesuit. That's how lucky we are to be here. It's so beautiful. It's such a wonderful place to be. And to have that experience, I wish everyone could have that experience. But until that happens, I think those who do get a chance to go should share it as best they can.
And you did. You wrote a book. It's called
did.
Spaceman.
Yep.
You can see the cover.
There's a cover there.
Here. Yep. So, one thing from the book. First of all, where did the idea come from to write?
To write the book?
Yeah.
I looked at writing a book as a way to get another way to get these stories out there. The experiences that I had. I enjoyed speaking about it. The social media was enjoyable, but the opportunity to write it up and to tell that story in written format was something that I was interested in. And so I spoke to some people about it. Some other astronauts had written books before I did, and asked them to get advice about doing it. It was something I really couldn't do until after I left NASA. So even though I thought about it when I was an astronaut, I really couldn't do anything about it until afterwards. And then once I got out, I spoke to other people, some literary agents and people in publishing, and it seemed like there would be interest in having me do this, and that's how it happened. I got myself an agent, I got a co-writer, we wrote a proposal, and we got a publisher and an editor, and things started happening.
One of the, let's say, themes or things you really stress in your book is the power of teamwork.
Yeah.
Something that goes throughout your career in NASA.
Yeah. So teamwork, what I realized when I came into NASA was that there was no longer going to be any individual success or individual failure even. That you're going to succeed or fail as a team. And my very first week at NASA, one of the other things I can't do is I can't swim. Now I can swim pretty well. But back then I didn't like the water very much. I told you I didn't like heights, and there's a lot of things that worried me. And I wasn't very comfortable in the water. And when we were selected as astronauts, we received a package in the mail that told us we were selected, and to get ready for our training, they wanted us to practice our swimming, which I was a bit horrified because I wasn't a very strong swimmer. And we had to pass a swim test in order to go to water survival with the United States Navy. And I was like, oh boy, this is I'm not a very strong swimmer. What am I going to do? And so I tried to practice as best I could in the few months I had before I showed up. And when we got to work that very first week, at the end of the week, that first week was mainly administrative things. We didn't really do much training. It was kind of introduction and orientation. And we were going to do the swim test the first day of the next week, the next Monday. And what happened is our leader, who was an experienced astronaut that was helping us, said before we went home for the weekend that very first week, he said, who are the strong swimmers here? And we had a few people raise their hands. And then he asked, who are the weak swimmers? And I raised my hand with a few other people. And then he said, okay, so all the strong swimmers and all the weak swimmers stay after class. Everyone else can leave. But all the strong swimmers, you're staying after class. You're going to get together over the weekend. And the strong swimmers are going to help the weak swimmers. Because when we go to the pool on Monday, everyone is going to pass before anyone leaves the pool. So we were all going to go there together, and no one was going to be allowed to leave the pool until everyone passed the swim test. And that's the way it was. And I realized that was the culture there. That's what teamwork was. And on my space missions, it was the same way. That when I made that mistake on that bolt, they weren't going to point the finger at me. Hey, it was obviously I made that mistake, but my team was there to pick us up. And we talked about that even in our press conferences, that there was not going to be any individual success or any individual failure. A lot of times success is easy to do as a team, but when you failed, you start pointing fingers. Oh, it was this guy that did it. It wasn't me, it was that person. So that was, for me, a really nice culture that we had, is that everyone had each other's back, and you were going to get that support no matter what happened.
One of the things that we usually see when people talk about your book is a question, so let's give a sneak preview to those who haven't read it. And the question goes, what does having the right stuff really mean?
Yeah, so this movie I talked about earlier in the book, The Right Stuff, is about what it takes to be an astronaut. And you might think from the book or the movie, it might be being a very cool person, calm, being able to think under pressure, handle life-threatening situations and so on. But I think what the definition of a good astronaut is someone who's a good teammate, someone who you can trust with your life, someone you can trust with your deepest secrets, your family, with whatever is important to you. That trust, that person that's not going to leave you alone or forget about you, that person that when you're doing a mission together, you can count on them. And that's what I think the right stuff is. Because being an astronaut, and I think everything that everyone does here in this complicated world we now live in, you need help. You need a team behind you. You need people to work with. You need people that are going to help you along, and you also need to help people along that journey as well. You need to do that journey together. And I think a person that's willing to do that, that's what I think is the most important quality of an astronaut.
Okay. 5 seconds break here. That was really, really good.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
You decided to leave NASA about 4 years ago and went back to teaching. You're a professor at Columbia. Why that decision?
Why did I decide to go to Columbia?
Why did you decide to leave NASA?
Oh, why did I leave? This is an interesting question, right? And it's as much as I love that job, I felt like it was time to do something else. And I never thought I would ever feel that way when I first started. I thought, at the time when you first started, I was thinking myself, how long would I do this? Some people say just a couple years. Some people say longer periods of time. I thought when I first started, maybe about 12 years I would do this and maybe do something else. It ended up being 18, and it was a really difficult decision to leave. But I felt like I had a chance to fly a couple times. I got to fly 2 extraordinary missions on Hubble, which to me, if you would have asked me what missions I would have wanted to be on, it would have been those missions. And I got to be a spacewalker on those missions, and especially the last mission to Hubble. I felt very satisfied in what I had a chance to do. And it was possible for me to stay and do another mission. In fact, I was offered another mission and turned it down. And when I turned it down, I realized I was telling myself something, and that was that it was time for me to do something else. And you could either, I think in life when it's time for change, and for me this was a drastic change, this was something that I dreamt about doing since I was a little boy. And I think every part of life has a phase to it, and whether or not we want to realize it, that yeah, it's time to move on to that next phase, you can either accept it or you can fight it. And I think I still fought it a little bit, even though after I made that change, but I knew it was time for me to move on, and the best thing you can do is try to embrace that new phase as best you can. And I think that's, to me, I think for the post-career of doing something like that, if you're able to do a dream job in your life, and that job has an ending to it, I think it's important to move on as best you can. Take what you learned and accept this new phase of life. So that's what I've tried to do, and that's, it's led to things at Columbia, which I think was the second part of your question. I was a professor, after I was working at NASA and I was rejected my 3rd time, I thought about, do I want to stay there or do I want to do something else? And I did get to teach part-time at Rice University, which is a university in Houston. I had great experience as in grad school at MIT and undergrad at Columbia. And I looked for a professor job and a faculty job, and I was hired at Georgia Tech. And I was there for less than a year, but it gave me a flavor of what it was like to be a full-time faculty member, and I really liked it. And I thought to myself, before I was selected by NASA, that, well, if they reject me again, at least I feel like I had a career that I could do and be happy with, and which was being a professor. And so when I lost that, when I lost the job, but when I got accepted by NASA and I left Georgia Tech to do that, I was thrilled to do that. But in the back of my mind, I knew that, well, you know, someday that NASA astronaut job is going to end, and you're faced with choices. You can go and stay with NASA. A lot of my friends did that. They running the Space Center. Charlie Bolden, my colleague, was the head of NASA for a while. Ellen Ochoa, another one of my colleagues, runs the Johnson Space Center. Bob Cabana runs the Kennedy Space Center. They're all former astronauts. So you could do those sorts of things. Or you could go work for a company, an aerospace company, or you could do a lot of things. But I really enjoyed that experience as a professor. And so then it was, where do I go? And Columbia was where I went as an undergrad. And I have a strong affection for that. I have affection for every school I went to. Columbia, though, really changed my life because it exposed me to people, to a faculty, to a culture, a mindset that anything could happen. And that's what I learned in college, more than anything else I think affected my life. When I was there, we also had Barack Obama, was also a student at Columbia, graduated 1 year before I did. Unfortunately, we didn't become good friends. I didn't know he was going to be president of the United States, or else I would have become his best friend. But that was the kind of mindset I think that I had going to Columbia. And so it really did change my life and opened up the world to me. And so thinking about where I would want to go, that was where, plus it was also kind of coming home. I was from the area, and being in New York, there's lots of opportunities for media. There's news media, television, all kinds of opportunities to make a difference, to tell the story and be able to impact students and people of all ages. So it seemed like the right fit, the right move.
We'll do one more quick one, and then we'll open up for the audience. You can raise your hand up right now. They'll get the mic to you, and we'll do one quick one, and then we go to the audience. So we have one here. Difference between, we have one question over here. One hand up here. You said that you had your first teaching experience, full-time teaching experience at Georgia Tech. So what's it like when you were a professor and the student would say, who you got for mechanical engineering, whatever, and they would say, well, Mike Massimino. And now it's who's teaching you at Columbia? Mike Massimino.
Yeah.
So what's it like being a celebrity professor, basically?
It's not, I don't know if it's the celebrity part of it. I think the experiences are different. When I taught at Georgia Tech, I was a tenure track professor. I was a young professor trying to get a research program started, and now as a professor at Columbia, I'm a professor of professional practice, which I help with research. I advise students, but I'm not trying to get a laboratory started. And I think what I'm able to bring differently than I did it was 20, almost 23 years ago now when I started at Georgia Tech a long time ago. Back then I didn't have all these experiences. And so instead of teaching a particular topic or a subject, now what I do is I teach a spaceflight course there, for example. I also teach a course on rocket building for first-year engineering students. And what I try to do is show them more the practical aspects of engineering. So a lot of what we study in engineering, even now, especially when I was a student, I think it's gotten a little more practically hands-on, where we do design projects and they work together as teams. And it's more fun, I think, and more interesting than it seemed. My recollection of it was a bit drier when I was a student. You had to learn these certain subjects, and whether it's fluid mechanics or physics or whatever, you had these certain subjects you had to learn. And so what I try to do with my teaching is the classes I teach are more the practical uses of engineering. You have to build this spacesuit, and you can't be theoretical. It has to really work, and you have to be able to communicate with the crew, and it has to really work. And this is how we did it. And so more, I guess, the hands-on practical engineering that I learned as an astronaut, and the lessons I learned as an astronaut, I try to convey those I think it's what the theoretical required classes are still important, and I think there are professors who are better suited to do that, and so what I try to add is bringing my experience to supplement the other classes the students are taking.
Okay, so first question here, and you can raise your hand for the next one if you want.
Has being up there changed your perception of what home is? Are you more an American or an Earthling now?
I consider myself to be an Earthling, and it changed my perspective. Seeing our planet, and I hope everyone who wants to here, this is a pretty young crowd, will get a chance to see the planet someday from space. For me, it was life-changing, and for those who are interested, I think they would find the same result. To get a chance to be up there and look and see our planet, I was able to see it and turn my head and see everything else out there, and there is no real good option anywhere around us, right? We've checked out the neighborhood. There's no place else for us to go. Maybe there's a planet. I do think that there is life other places. We haven't found each other yet, but maybe someday we will. There's probably other planets somewhere in other solar systems that we might be able to live on, but there's nothing anywhere close. So we're here, and I had this sense that we're all together on this spaceship, together. It's our spaceship. We all need to take care of it. And so it did change my perception of it. I feel now that my home is planet Earth. That's where I'm from. Thank you.
We have 2 hands over there.
Tell us what went through your head when you exited the spacecraft and walked into space. What did it feel like? What emotions?
For the first time? Yeah, so one of the interesting things they do is that when you launch into space, they're not monitoring your heart rate. But because there's really no reason to do that. They know you're going to have a high heart rate. But when when you go out for a spacewalk, they have to monitor your heart rate. And that is because they want to monitor your use and your consumption of your oxygen. They're trying to calculate what we call our metabolic rate. And they need to calculate that because you're also, as you breathe in oxygen, you're breathing out carbon dioxide, and they filter, the carbon dioxide is filtered in your spacesuit. So they have to keep this calculation going because they have to see how you're doing and how much longer you can stay out there given the way you're using your oxygen and so on. So the heart rate is part of that. So that's a long story of they monitor our heart rate when we're inside of that spacesuit. Going outside, you're all wired up underneath. And so your heart rate goes really high. My resting heart rate was probably, at that time, probably about 50 to 55 beats per minute, or normal exercising heart rate, I guess, was around there, a good heart rate. When I exited, I spiked over about 120 beats per minute is when I went out there. And so they tell you that. That's like something you're going to find out when you get inside. Well, you spiked it. The doctors are on the ground. So first of all, there was a big excitement. But I think what really hit me was as we were getting close to going outside, and you're inside the spacesuit. Even though you're out there spacewalking for 8 hours, you're actually in that spacesuit. In a case for an 8-hour spacewalk, you're really in there for closer to 10 hours. Because you got to get inside, and then you breathe inside of there for a while to get yourself acclimated, and then you exit. And so it's a long time that you're inside of there. So there's a good amount of time, about an hour or so before you go outside, that you're in the airlock waiting, making sure everything's going to be okay. And I remember looking at that hatch to the outside and realizing that space was on the other side of that door. That now was, even though I was in space inside the spaceship, there was something different about going outside. It's kind of like looking at an aquarium of fish and then going into and scuba diving. And that's what I felt like. That was really going into space, even though I was already orbiting. And so once that door was open, my buddy, Jim Newman, was the experienced astronaut who was with me, because usually they pair up an experienced person with a new person. And that's what they did for us on my first flight. And then I was the experienced person on my second flight. But on this one, Jim went out first and made sure everything was okay. And then he says, all right, Mike, it's time to come out. And I came out of the hatch, and I poked my head out first. And so the bulkhead of the forward bulkhead of the space shuttle payload bay is above my head. So the hatch is at the bottom of that, so where the little hole that we're coming out of. My head comes out, and Newman is up probably about as high as where the ceiling is, hanging on a handrail, and he's looking down at me, and I can see his face, right? He's got his visor up, and I can see his face, and he's just smiling at me like, check this out, right? And I see him, and I make eye contact, and I smile at him, and then behind his head is Africa. You know, the continent is behind him, and it's unbelievable. It's beautiful. And I'm looking at Africa, and I thought to myself, how am I going to get anything done out here? It is just so beautiful. And then I turned my head again, and I looked in front of me, and there was a handrail for the bulkhead of the shuttle, and I was like, all right, I know what to do here. This is fine. You know, I can do that. And I moved around and got myself acclimated, because you have to go to work. You know, you're not just out there floating around. And we had a lot of work to do that day. But that's what the first impression was. That first look was wow, this is amazing. How am I going to get anything done? This is going to be a distraction. But you get these little glimpses. You get some time to look. But you know, you also train to do your job. Did I just lose the mic? Did you lose the mic? You good? Did you lose it?
You can grab mine. We have time for one more question. We had a hand up over there.
How's that? Okay, I'll just hold it.
Okay. Hi. I was wondering, was it a challenge for you to enjoy sunsets on Earth after you had a chance to see 16 sunsets per day in space? And actually, was it hard for you to continue after your child dream was successfully done? Was it a challenge for you to continue in positive attitude?
All right, so there's two questions there, right? So the first one was, it's a what?
Basically the same thing. How do you keep motivated after going through
Okay,
such
but
an
the other thing was a
experience?
sunset, which is cool. So I'll start with the second one first. As far as like trying to be motivated after accomplishing that goal, after getting selected, you know, you get this opportunity, and so I think maybe with some of you are trying to do, you get the opportunity you want. You start your business, or you get your first client, or you get the big account, or you get the opportunity that you're dreaming about, that you really want, that you work so hard for. And then what your reward is hard work, right? So that's the way it was with becoming an astronaut. The dream is achieved. You get the opportunity to become an astronaut, but really the dream is not achieved until you get to space and you get a chance to perform and do those things. And so in the short term of, you know, after getting picked, those years as an astronaut was now you want to make the most of this opportunity. So it was really important for me to do the best I could with that opportunity, because so many people had wanted to do it, and I was so lucky to get selected that I needed to do the best job I could to be worthy of that opportunity. I didn't want to squander that opportunity. And now after being an astronaut, I think it's just a different phase of life, of being motivated to do other things with my teaching, the work that I do, even with the television and with the book, and even coming here, of trying to share those experiences that I've had and trying to inspire the next generation, particularly with my job as a professor, of trying to share those stories to help other people, and maybe they get something out of it. The sunrise and sunset, because I was thinking about this just the other night, because the sunsets here are just beautiful over the water. And I was on my, this was, I think, maybe my third spacewalk. Probably not until my second flight that I had this experience where as you go around the planet at 17,500 miles an hour, 90 minutes for one orbit, so every 45 minutes you get a sunrise or a sunset. So what that means is in a 24-hour period you get 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in one 24-hour period. Now we only get one of each here, but you get 16 of them each. So 32 of these experiences while you're going around a planet. And during a spacewalk, you can feel things change as you go from dark to light or light to dark. And in the sunlight, it is so bright. It is very, very bright. Like I said, brighter than that light. And in the darkness, it's the darkest dark I've ever experienced. There's also a huge temperature swing. In the sunlight, it could be as hot as 200 degrees. And in the darkness, it can be as cold as minus 200. Now, in your spacesuit and around the space shuttle or the space station, you don't feel that drastic of a change. It kind of modulates it, but you certainly feel the cold and the warmth. You feel those changes kind of deep in your bones. And there was this one time during one of my spacewalks where we were coming around the planet with the payload bay kind of in the direction of our travel. And I could feel the warmth of the sun coming. And you could feel it before you see it. It was still dark where I was, but I could feel the warmth coming. And sure enough, we come around the corner, and I can see the sun appear. And the sun in space looks like a star. It doesn't look like because the atmosphere kind of clouds it, makes it look like more of a disk. But in space, it looks like a big star out there. And you see it against a black sky, which is kind of cool. You see the sun against a black sky, not against the blue sky that we see, but against the black sky. And as we were coming around, I looked down at the planet. Everything was in this perfect position so I could witness this. And I see the line that separates night and day on our planet. And we call it the Terminator. And on one side it's dark, and on the other side it's light, right? And as we're coming around, I see that line moving. And it was a steady motion, just a steady motion of the line moving, marching across the planet. And what it is, it's the day-night line, and it's dark in one area of the planet, and then as the sun comes up, it's now shining on them, and it's day now. It's a sunrise. And as this is happening, I realize what I'm watching is, I'm watching the planet rotate beneath me. I'm watching the rotation of our planet, and I look back at the sun, and I realize, sun's not going anywhere. It's staying right there. We're the ones that are moving. And you know this because I learned this as a small child, like everyone in the room did. The Earth goes around the sun and it rotates. But now I'm seeing this from this perspective, and I realize that it's not a sunrise. It's just us moving into the sun, and that's moving around the sun and turning. So that's the way I visualize a sunrise or a sunset now. When I see the sun going down, what I realize is happening is that we're rotating, continuing our rotation to the east. There's all of us doing this every day, right? We're continuing to rotate to the east, and we're rotating away from the sun. The sun is not moving, although we think it is. We're the ones that are moving, and it's time for us to say goodnight, right? We're moving away from it. And the same for a sunrise, is that as that sun comes up, it's not moving at all. We're the ones that are moving into it, and now it's our turn to have light on wherever we are in the world as we're rotating into it. So that's how I think of it. I think of us as we're the ones that are moving. We're on the spaceship traveling around the sun, all of us, and that's what a sunrise or a sunset means to me now.
Now we could definitely keep this going for a long time, but the program director is making this kind of gesture, so he's very dangerous, and besides he's my older brother, so I have to listen. So two things I think you need to take away from this. One, Mike promised us all a ride in space since we were young enough, so we'll hold you to that.
As long as you take me with you.
Yeah, okay. And number two, when announcing him, Sanya said our next speaker was out of this world. The only thing I want to say is thank you for the talk. It was an out of this world experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.